Hi, this is Wesley Lawton. I'm a Grief Support Services Manager for Hospice of Michigan in the Macomb County area and one of the facilitators of the Men Overcoming Loss Men's Grief Support Group. This video is to summarize the group meeting that took place on December 21st. And this meeting was a little bit more dialogue-based, support-based than some of our regular third Tuesday of the month meetings have been, since we only had the one meeting this month, given that it's a holiday season and everything. And we opened it up with David, another facilitator, talking about expectation and preparation. These are concepts that have a lot to do with the season of Advent in the Christian tradition. It's about getting ready for Christmas, about expecting and preparing for a celebration of the coming of Jesus in the Christian religious tradition. And we didn't focus so much on Advent or on Jesus in this group, of course, but did talk about how these concepts of preparation and expectation also relate to the grief journey. And so David talked about a little bit how as we make our way through grief throughout our lives, especially in some of the beginning weeks, months, even years, when the grief is especially weighty and relevant or not relevant, but salient in our lives, it can be very important to basically be intentional about it, something that we talk about pretty frequently, actually. And as we approach milestones such as big days like the holidays or the anniversary of the death, or even smaller things like a grief support group meeting or an encounter with a friend or a family member who you haven't seen since the death of your loved one. It can help to look ahead to it and to think about how can I make this meaningful? How can I navigate this? How can I make my way through this in a way that is honoring to my loved one and helpful and realistic for me? This is sort of as opposed to just we talked about the idea of being battered by waves. And that's something that is very natural and easy to kind of fall into after the loss of a loved one. And inevitably, if it's somebody who you're very close to and your grief is very strong, you will almost certainly have experiences like this. You'll have seasons, perhaps short, perhaps long, where you feel like you're at the mercy of the waves of grief. You feel like you have no control, and you don't know when a grief burst is going to hit you. You feel like it's too difficult to make serious decisions other than when absolutely necessary. But it's great to avoid being in that position any more than is really necessary, any more than as much as you have control over such a thing. And we really can do that. We do have control to a large degree over our thoughts, over our actions, over whether or not we prepare for something as opposed to just entering in it and kind of going with the flow. And as I mentioned in the group, when you're grieving, a lot of times the flow kind of drags you down. And so just deciding to go with that flow all the time isn't really in your best interest when you're grieving. Again, there are times where you're just too tired or something just comes at you from out of the blue. And so I'm not criticizing those who feel like they're in that position whatsoever. But what we tried to do in this group, one of the things was remind the guys in the group and empower them to know that there's another way to make your way through grief. in certain times. And so the guys shared about how they relate to that, whether it's preparing for Christmas gatherings, preparing for a group meeting like this, and how not only do we as facilitators get ourselves in a particular mindset to be who we need to be in a group like this, but that those who are participating in the group can also think ahead a little bit and think about maybe something that they want to talk about or ask about, or something that they want to sort of set aside for this time that we have together. Or if it's just thinking about the whole, stepping back, thinking about the grief journey for the foreseeable future and ways that they're approaching that, and some of the things that were discussed. So we did talk about coping with the holidays, and actually as I'm talking, I'm a very bad multitasker, so let's see if I can talk while I do this. I want to bring up a document that I read a little bit off of during the meeting here. We talked a little bit about coping with holiday gatherings and some strategies for that. I didn't focus on that a whole lot, but it did come up, and I want to read for you. I want to read for you something that I read in the group from our Hope for the Holidays program. And of course, that's a whole long hour-plus program, so I didn't spend a ton of time here, something that I actually closed with in the group. But the 3 C's of coping with the holidays, and those are choose, communicate, and compromise. So during the holidays, it's easy to drift into activities that increase our pain, but we do have choices. We can decide what activities we wish to participate in, who we want to be with, what we want to do. One of the choices we may want to consider is how to mark the loss during the holidays, finding ways to recognize and acknowledge that individual can bring a positive focus. So to acknowledge that individual who we lost can bring a positive focus to our grief. Lighting a candle, creating a ritual, placing a memento on a tree, a moment of silence, or a holiday toast are simple ways to acknowledge the loss. So that's choose. Communicate is, it is important that we discuss our choices with others, especially those who are affected by them. They have needs as well. And finally, compromise. Each of us deals with loss in our own particular way. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. When we communicate, we may find that our feelings and needs will differ. We need to find space to compromise. Nothing changes the fact that the holidays can be difficult while grieving, but as we choose our actions, communicate our choices with others, and find suitable compromises, we may find that they are bearable, and that gives us renewed strength and hope. That's taken from Holiday issue of Journeys from the Hospice Foundation of America. And so I read that hoping that those concepts would be helpful to the guys in the group, and a few of them responded saying that it really kind of hits the nail on the head for them, and kind of helps them think about their upcoming holiday gatherings. And so maybe there's something that you can take from that as well. And as I explained, these concepts of choosing, communicating, and compromising do extend beyond holiday gatherings, and they can be usable for many different types of situations, especially in relationships and encounters with loved ones, in gatherings in particular. But it's applicable outside of the holiday season. So, and then I would say the other main issue that we discussed was one of the guys asked, because somebody was talking about last holiday season, and some were saying that their loss was so fresh at that time that they were really in shock and just kind of making their way through. And now in their second Christmas celebration season or holiday season, the weight of their grief is much heavier, and they're more sad than they were the first time around. And that's a fairly common thing. Again, especially if the loss is within several weeks or even a few months or so of the death, sometimes even longer before the death that can happen. But usually the fresher the loss is, the more likely it is that your first holiday season, you'll feel more in shock, or whatever time follows that death. And others shared about how they were very deep in sadness and grief and loneliness and all these kinds of things last year. And this year, even though it's painful at times, they can find the motivation to do a little bit of decorating, unlike last year in their cases, or to participate in holiday celebrations, which is something some of them weren't able to do last year. Some of them, many of them, the guys in the group, it was their first holiday season this year. It is their first one. And they're in that place where they're just sort of keeping their head down and trying to survive and make it through. And so I seemed like it was helpful for them to hear that other guys had been through that last year, and that this year they're finding things a little bit more manageable. They're able to participate a little bit more. Again, even though it's still one of the harder times of year for them. And so we talked about progress. We talked about growth in the grief journey. And somebody whose loss was more recent asked, how do you measure that? How do you know when you're progressing? And so we talked a little bit about that, about how journaling, writing is probably the most tangible way to measure progress in grief, because you can actually look back and see what you were thinking and feeling months ago, or in some cases years ago, if you've been doing it for a while. And you can much more easily than any other way compare where you're at now and the kinds of issues you're facing and perhaps writing about now to where you were at then. And so that's one of the several great advantages of writing your way through grief. Even if it's not something that you normally do or that you've done before, we do encourage everybody to give it a try, at least for a while, maybe 2-3 weeks or so, and see if it's something they're open to, because there are so many benefits. But even outside of that, there are a couple of other ways. I mean, you can think about, maybe you're trying to think of exactly how I put it in the group, but one example was when you think about your loved one, you bring them to mind or look at photos or do things that remind you of them, you may find yourself crying less often or less heavily than you did in the beginning, or maybe even smiling or chuckling once in a while, which often does not happen in the first weeks or so, sometimes for a longer period. So that's a sign that you're progressing. Another one was, things that in the beginning, this is similar, but things, different rituals or activities that you couldn't bring yourself to do before, now you can do. And eventually those things might be powerful connections to your loved one. In fact, because it was such a powerful connection, that's why you couldn't bring yourself to do it at first. Again, looking at photos or participating in the holidays, as was brought up in our group. It's just too fresh, too sensitive in the beginning, a lot of times. And so I encourage all the guys, as I've done before, to be open to those things being meaningful and important, or just something that they're able to do in the future, because again, those can be powerful, positive connections as you work your way through grief over time. That's another way that you can measure progress. But then somebody else mentioned, I'm glad he did, about how talking about progress like this, it can get easy to get into a mindset of like a checklist, or like setting goals and trying to achieve those goals and sort of conquering your grief in that way, and about how that's really not how it works. This gentleman lost his loved one, I believe it was between 2 and 3 years ago. And so, a little bit farther along in some aspects than some of the other guys. And he just said, it doesn't work like that. You do it one day at a time. And that's really, I think, true and a more helpful way to look at it for most people. So talked about how progress is really measured in hindsight only. And when you think about the present, when you think about the future, focusing on making progress and I guess beating your grief or achieving goals, it's not as helpful. It's not really a realistic way to make your way through. You are better off focusing on the present moment, or on perhaps what the next step is that you feel. Or usually it's not as clear as that. It's a whole bunch of things going on at once. But the phrase "one day at a time" being more applicable than making progress when it comes to how you mentally approach your grief journey. So there are some good topics that were discussed. Hopefully me sharing about this, hopefully not rambling too much, is helpful to you in some way. And as may come across in this video, if you're somebody who has seen videos like this, or this might be your first time and you've never participated in our group, we invite you to join us. And we are making some changes. Before it was one group that was taking place the first and third Tuesday of each month. And I went over this, I think, in the last video recording as well, the summary video. And that was a general men's grief group. That's what it's been up to this point. And we found that all of the people who stick with our group, in fact, we had, I think, nine grieving guys join our group this time. And all of them have lost a spouse, it seems like. That's just kind of the direction that our group has gone. And so we have other guys who have joined our group and stuck around for one or maybe two meetings and had a hard time connecting because so many issues particular to the loss of a spouse would come up. They'd have a hard time relating to that. And so unfortunately, they would sometimes feel like maybe this group isn't quite right for them. And so we want to meet the needs of those guys. So starting in January, which is just a couple weeks away now, we're going to be starting to offer 3 men's groups. And one of them, the first one taking place, is going to be the first Wednesday of each month. So that'll be January 5th for the first one. And that is a grieving dads group, a bereaved dads group. Of course, a men's group for loss of child, because we know from the experiences of some people who are part of this group or have been, just from observation, that guys who have lost kids may be the least likely to join a grief group with men and others in it. Just because there are so many specific expectations or experiences to the loss of a child when you're a grieving man in our society. And so wanted to offer a place for them and look forward to what kinds of good things will come from that. And then the next one that will take place is going to remain the third Tuesday of each month, just like this last one was here. So that'll be January 18th for the first one. And that's going to be a continuing men's loss of spouse group. And so we hope and expect that the majority of guys who have participated in our men's group up to this point, who have lost spouses, will continue on with that group. And then finally, the third group isn't going to be starting until February, but that'll be the first Tuesday of each month. So February 1st will be the first one. And that'll be more of a general men's loss group. And we're really targeting that towards guys who have had a loss that is not spouse or child, who don't have a group that is specifically for them. So we expect and hope that we'll have guys who have lost parents or perhaps friends or siblings. Not that those populations don't deserve their own group, but we just only have so many days in the week, so many hours in the day to provide specific groups. And so we chose to focus on loss of child and loss of spouse for the specific groups. But we hope that others, this general men's group, will be a special place for them to feel maybe more connected or welcome than they would coming into a general group, which really has become a loss of spouse group, which is what we've been having in the last several months in particular. So all those groups take place from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the general men's group and the loss of child group, well, I was about to say that they'll have a virtual option and an in-person option, but my understanding, this is sort of hot off the presses, is that at least in January, we won't be having any in-person meetings still because of the rising case numbers with the COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully in February and moving forward, we'll have those in-person options available. And so please stay tuned for that. You can contact us if you want to know more as that progresses. And the men's loss of spouse group will continue to be virtual only for this time regardless, hoping for and looking at an in-person option for the spring, probably starting in April, if we feel like that's a safe and wise decision to do for that group. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this. We hope you'll join us. You can find out more information about all of our updated groups at HOM.org. That's HOM for Hospice of Michigan.org. And up at the top, you can click grief support. From there, there's a place to click here to learn more about our groups and programs, and you can scroll through and learn about our men's groups and others as well. And we hope that you'll consider joining us and registering. Again, thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it helpful. Please feel free to share it with somebody else who you think might benefit from it too, if that's something you'd like to do. So please take care. And if it's applicable to you, we hope that you have, as I shared in the group, I've learned not to say Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays to those who have just lost a loved one, because that kind of a happy experience may not be realistic for many. And so what I will say is I hope that you have moments of joy and peace this holiday season, and that things go smoothly for you. You make it through okay, and that it gets easier and you're able to enjoy it more as the years go by. Thank you.